In the fall of 2018, I responded to a house fire in a quiet neighborhood in upstate New York. The house was an old Victorian-style structure that had been abandoned for years. Neighbors reported seeing smoke pouring from the windows, but by the time we arrived, something felt off. There were no visible flames, just thick black smoke curling from the roof. I led my team through the front door, forcing our way inside. The interior was charred, walls blackened, furniture reduced to skeletal remains. But the strange part? The fire wasn't spreading. Usually in an old wooden house, flames devour everything in sight, but here it was like the fire was stuck. The deeper we went, the more unsettling it got. The air was wrong. It wasn't the usual choking, burning scent of a fire. It smelled sweet, rotten, like something had been left to decay for too long. As we advanced through the house, my flashlight caught something on the walls. Words burned into the wood. At first I thought it was just scorch marks, but when I got closer, I realized they were names, dozens of names written over and over. Some looked like they had been scratched in by hand, others seemed seared into the wood by the fire itself. A voice crackled over my radio. "Chief, we found something." I followed my team to the back of the house where the fire was still burning in the same spot, but this time we saw what was fueling it. A figure was standing in the middle of the flames. At first I thought it was a victim trapped in the fire, but then I realized they weren't moving. The flames curled around them, licking at their clothes, but they didn't burn. They just stood there, head tilted, watching us. My instinct screamed at me to back away, but one of the rookies, Tyler, froze. His breathing was heavy, his hands clenched around the hose. Then the figure stepped forward. The flames followed with them. Tyler let out a choked gasp and suddenly collapsed. I grabbed him, dragging him out of the house as fast as I could. The moment we hit fresh air, the fire inside roared. It surged up the walls, consuming the house in a matter of seconds. Tyler was shaking, his skin ice cold. He muttered something over and over. I had to lean in to hear it. It said my name. The house burned for 7 hours. Nothing could put it out. By the time it was over, nothing remained but a foundation of ash. I later looked up the history of the house. In 1932, it had belonged to a man named Samuel Odell. He had been accused of setting multiple fires across town. They say he died in his own house fire. The official cause, spontaneous combustion. But here's the thing, his body was never found. And Tyler? He quit the force a week later. That night he left me a voicemail. His voice was shaking. It said my name, and now it won't stop. In the winter of 2015, I was called to a fire at an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of Detroit. The place had been shut down for nearly 20 years, a relic of a time when asylums and sanatoriums were still active. The city had been planning to demolish it, but squatters and vandals had made it their playground for years. This time, though, the fire wasn't an accident. Someone had called 911, but no one ever claimed responsibility. By the time we arrived, the fire had already eaten through half of the building. Flames licked at the sky, sending black smoke pouring into the cold air. It should have been a simple job. Get in, make sure no one was inside, and contain the fire. But from the moment I stepped into that building, something felt wrong. The first thing I noticed was the lack of heat. Fires that size usually blast you with a wall of unbearable heat. But here, the air was cold, damp even, like the fire was burning somewhere else. My breath fogged in front of me, and every exhale felt heavier, as if the air itself didn't want me there. We split into teams, searching for anyone who might be trapped. I took the east wing with my partner, Dylan. The hallways were lined with old hospital beds, some still covered in stained sheets. The fire seemed to flicker in and out of existence, almost like it was moving when we weren't looking, but the real nightmare began when we reached the old psychiatric ward. A thick cloud of smoke curled along the ceiling, denser than it should have been. Dylan moved ahead, radioing in that we had no victims found. That's when I heard it. A voice. It wasn't shouting for help, it wasn't screaming, it was whispering. I froze. The smoke in front of me shifted, not like air currents moving through. It formed a shape. A man, tall, thin, standing completely still in the middle of the burning hallway. I pointed my flashlight at it, and the moment the beam hit, the shape moved. Not away, toward me. I stumbled back, my boot catching on the broken tile floor. The smoke thinned just enough for me to see the figure more clearly. He was wearing an old hospital gown, the kind patients wore decades ago. His arms were dangling at his sides, unnatural, stiff. But the worst part, his face. There wasn't one, just a dark, gaping void where his features should have been. I grabbed Dylan's arm, trying to get him to move, but he was just standing there, frozen. The radio in his hand crackled, static at first, then a voice, not ours. "Stay, it's not done yet." I yanked him away, nearly dragging him down the hallway. The fire was closing in behind us, but it didn't feel real anymore. The walls flickered between flame and darkness, like we were running through two different realities at once. Then, just as we reached the exit, the voice called my name. It was clear, personal. I turned just for a second, and in that moment I saw something that still haunts me. The smoke had split apart, revealing a door, an untouched door in the middle of a burning hallway, a patient's room. Inside there was a single hospital bed, and on that bed, strapped down by leather restraints, was a man. He wasn't moving, but his eyes were open, and he was staring right at me. Then the fire exploded around us. I hit the ground as the entire hallway caved in. Dylan grabbed me, hauling me out just before the ceiling collapsed. When we made it outside, gasping for air, the entire east wing was gone. Later, after the fire was out, I checked the building's history. The psychiatric wing had been closed down long before the hospital itself due to a fire in 1968. There had been one patient left inside during the evacuation, a man they had been experimenting on. They said he had died in the flames, but if that were true, then why did he say my name? In the summer of 2014, I was stationed at a small fire department in Arizona, right on the outskirts of the desert. Fires weren't uncommon. Dry heat, abandoned buildings, and careless campers kept us busy. But there was one fire I'll never forget. A call came in just past midnight about a blaze deep in the desert near an old mining town that had been abandoned for decades. There was no electricity, no gas lines, nothing that should have caused a fire. When we arrived, we saw the flames flickering against the night sky, but something was strange. The fire wasn't spreading. It was contained in a perfect circle. No brush burning, no debris catching, just a ring of flames in the middle of nowhere. The dispatcher had said no structures were near, but as we got closer I saw something in the fire. A figure. At first I thought it was a person trapped inside, but as we got closer I realized something was wrong. The figure was standing completely still. No screaming, no movement, just watching. I jumped out, racing toward the flames, my hose at the ready. But as soon as I stepped forward, the fire shifted. It didn't move like a normal fire. It recoiled, like it was alive. I stopped. My heart pounded as the figure took a step forward. The flames didn't touch him. His body was charred, blackened skin peeling away, but he didn't collapse. His face was a mess of burned flesh and exposed bone. But his eyes were intact, and they were locked on me. Then he smiled. A voice crackled over the radio, static, then a whisper. I recognized the voice immediately. It was mine. I turned to my partner, but he was frozen in place, his knuckles white around the hose, his eyes locked on the figure in the fire. The flames around us flared, growing taller. The figure took another step forward, and suddenly I felt something. Heat, but not from the fire. It was inside me, burning. I dropped to my knees, gasping, my entire body searing from the inside out. I could hear my partner yelling, but his voice was distant. Then, just as I thought my skin would peel away from my bones, the fire vanished. No smoke, no embers, no sign it had ever existed. The ground where the fire had burned was untouched, as if it had never been there. I turned to my partner, shaking, waiting for him to say something. Instead, he pointed. I followed his gaze to my arm. My jacket was burned through, the fabric seared away. But the skin underneath, it was perfect. Except for one thing. A handprint, a blackened, scorched handprint, burned deep into my flesh. I didn't sleep for days after that. When I finally did, I woke up to the smell of smoke. My room was clear, no fire, no heat. But in the mirror, I saw him, standing behind me and smiling. Some fires never go out, some names are never forgotten. And some things were never meant to be seen. If these stories kept you on edge, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more chilling, true horror stories. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because some stories are still burning.